Namaste, and welcome to another episode of the VM Podcast. The VM Podcast, for those who don't know, is a project by Vichar Manthan that's looking to explore modern day issues and concepts through a dharmic civilizational lens. Thank you to all of our listeners and subscribers. You can catch this podcast on any of the podcast platforms out there. And let us know if you have any questions, queries, or if you agreed or even disagreed with anything that's been discussed. You can email me on podcast@vicharmanthan.org. I'm your host, Sumit Sharma, and it is my great privilege to bring such a project to your ears. Today, we have Dr. Bansri Lakhani as our special guest. Quite honored to have her on. I see her as a brilliant role model and successful, driven person in our society. I think we have much to learn from her contributions to life, the way she is as a person, and I'm sure we'll unpick some of that here today on the podcast. Bansri Ben, welcome to the show.
Namaste, Sumit. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for that very humbling introduction.
Bansri Ben, you studied at medical school in Leicester. You then did your surgical training in Nottingham, and you are a ophthalmologist by day. But your life has so much more depth. What else are you involved in, or have you been a part of?
Well, what a wonderful question, Sumitji. I very much enjoy my daytime job of being an ophthalmologist. But along the journey, I've had the privilege of many life enriching experiences. And one of those key things has been my exposure to Sewa and what it means to serve. So I've spent a lot of time working with the Youth for Sewa project, founding it, seeing it through its first 5 years.
Nice.
And the most rewarding thing is to see the interns work on their own growth and their personal development through service and come out at the other end of the journey wanting to contribute and give more to society.
Amazing. So that's the Youth for Sewa project. And so for anyone listening that's not heard of that, please go Google them, check out what they've been doing. But Bansri Ben, while you're here, could you, for anyone that doesn't know, help us quickly understand what the YFS project is all about? What does one go through?
So, Youth for Sewa is an internship program open to young people who have finished university or are of young professionals. And the idea is to use the journey of Sewa, experiences of giving, working with NGOs at a grassroots level, to use it as a process for self-development, to be inspired by Karyakartas who have given their lives to this kind of work.
So this is someone that's just come out of uni or is still at uni, go and do 6 weeks unpaid living in rural India.
The journey starts with various orientation days where we learn how to give public speaking and understand what Seva means and how we can apply this to our daily lives. Prep you, absolutely, yeah. And because it's not easy, these are challenges that many of us will have never have come across in our lives in the UK. And then we go and spend 6 weeks out in rural India working with NGOs that do incredible things, from working with children with disabilities to runaway children to helping educate, whether it's a school for deaf children or blind children. So these are really enriching experiences that show us what it means to give, to serve, what hardship looks like. And the key message here is, okay, we've had that experience. What next? The question really is, how do we then use that experience as a catalyst to change how we are back here, back in the UK? How do we use that as a catalyst to increase our contributions to society once we're back?
I think both at a very personal level there. For someone that goes through an internship like that, that must be an amazing, enriching experience, and must really change the way they sort of see the world when they get back, inspired to make change. So you helped build that organization from the ground up, which I think is amazing, and that must have stemmed from your time at NHSF whilst you were at uni. Tell me a little bit about your journey then into surgical training. Were there any major moments for you at that time?
It's interesting. I don't know where the initial idea of being a surgeon came from. And ideas are wonderful things because you can never quite pinpoint the start of where, this sort of inception. You can't, it's your idea, but you don't quite know where it came from. So for various reasons, I think I ended up choosing to do ophthalmology. But what I remember clearly is towards the end of my medical school and as a junior doctor, I was incredibly driven. Okay. And I don't think we knew each other then, Sumitji, but if you
No.
did, I was a completely different individual. Ophthalmology is one of the most competitive surgical specialties in the UK and around the world. And it's definitely a privilege to be an ophthalmologist.
Yeah. So for anyone that doesn't know, that eye doctor, eye specialist, everything about the eyes.
And the thing is that to get into these sort of surgical training programs, particularly as a woman, there's a sort of personality that you require, a sort of ambition, drive, and without it, there's no way that you're going to get in. And so, having secured my surgical training program, I then negotiated a 6-month break with my parents, where
Right.
I said, I'm going to go away for 6 months, no questions asked. And
They
I
agreed, obviously.
reluctantly agreed, some would say. But I spent those 6 months in India, and I was living in rural India, working with different NGOs. And that, Sumitji, I would say, is probably the biggest paradigm shift in my life, those 6 months.
Wow.
Living in poverty, living simply, sleeping without air conditioners, surrounded by spiders, which I have a phobia of,
Wow.
washing my own clothes in cold water, just seeing firsthand, how
Living raw,
living raw. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great way to describe it.
seeing firsthand what.
So, seeing firsthand how you can have so little and yet experience an abundance of emotion and happiness.
Amazing.
So you'd see little children running around the streets with hardly any clothes on their back. And I'd say the majority of them may not even know where their next meal is going to come from. But they were playing, they were sharing, they were laughing. There was a real sense of joy.
In having so little yet having so much. Wow.
There was also a deep sense of giving and sharing in this community that had very little. So one particular memory that's very deeply embedded in my mind is I was doing these rounds of giving lunch to Majis in the slum area that we were working in. And these are elderly women or elderly men who don't have any family. And this is their one meal a day that the NGO provides. And it's a couple of rotis and some sabji. And it's really only enough to feed them. We go to them, we deliver the dabba and have a little bit of a conversation. They empty the contents out, they wash it, and we're having a chat, and then they give it back to us. And I remember going to one Maji's house, and as she pours the contents of the dabba out, she divides it in two, and then she gives half of it to the dogs.
Oh, wow.
And I sort of look at her in disbelief, and then I ask her, "Wow, you're giving half of your one meal a day to the dogs," and she just beautifully, she just says to me, "Yeah, how can I eat? How can I feed myself when there are these dogs that are going hungry?"
Wow, that's beautiful.
I think it's a beautiful extension of the way that we see our sense of self. How can I eat when at my doorstep there's hunger? Be it a dog,
Mm.
be it a child. And I think that's really stayed with me in my journey from there onwards.
So that's definitely one moment that you called out as a paradigm shift in your life. Could you maybe decorate a little bit for us? Another moment like that in your 6 month time in rural India that has shaped who you are today? What idea has stuck with you?
Sumiji, there are so many moments. I don't know if I can find one for you, but I can definitely highlight. Perhaps I can explore a theme that came about through my time in India.
Because there are so many moments.
There are so many moments,
We'll have
absolutely.
to write a book one day. You must do that.
I was working with an NGO called Manav Sadhana, and I met many inspiring Gaidakartas at this organization. And one of the things I started to notice is that people would skip lunch.
Okay.
So during the day, we'd be out in the field working, in the slum community or teaching, and there was this sort of natural skipping of lunch. No one would stop, or if we'd stop, there'd be a bit of chai, and I would always take my bottled water with me or Fanta to keep me going. And after a while, I started skipping lunch too because just no one was eating lunch, and I never initially I didn't understand why this was. I just thought, well, no, it's difficult to carry food out with you, and it just makes practically, logistically, it's easier not to eat it. But then I asked,
You
and
solutioned it in your head first.
a solution to my head, that's it. But then finally I asked because I thought, well, it's really hot, and we're on the verge of collapse. Why aren't we eating lunch? And I remember this Karyakata saying to me, well, if the communities we serve survive on one meal a day,
Wow.
surely it makes sense for us to live on one meal a day.
Really put yourself into the heart of the problem, feel how it feels. Wow. And so you did that?
Absolutely. And what I took away from this is how little we need to survive.
Mm.
Do we actually need to eat 3 times a day? We have an abundance of food and choice. And I think it's really grounding, it's really humbling to remember or to stay grounded to those experiences which show you how little we actually need.
It's true. We live absolutely abundantly, and the scales are tipped. And I think it's trying to bring about that balance that is one way in which we can sort of contribute to society, which I think brings us on to sort of the main theme for this podcast here today is sort of, why ideas are important, how we can contribute to society, and how to make those sustainable. So, Bansri, sustainable contributions. Why is a topic like that important to you?
As I've gone on this personal journey of Sewa and giving, I've learned that there's a variety of ways in which we can give back to society. So, be it through my career choice as being a surgeon, being the best surgeon I can be, helping my patients, being conscientious, wanting to improve the healthcare system. That's one way of giving back.
Okay, and you paint that so humbly. So you've qualified through your ophthalmology very quickly.
So, uh, thank you, Sumitji. And I think that's largely down to this drive of wanting to be the best you can be, and that's
Mm,
your own sort of personal sense of dharma.
yeah, and we've been through that through a couple of episodes of the VM podcast about how it is your dharmic. It's dharmic to be the best you can. I think you follow that well. So
Sumitji, I think being the best you can be, will never work against you.
yeah,
Whether it's a surgeon or as a lawyer or as an engineer or even working in IT, the more skills you develop, the more of an expert you'll be. Naturally, you'll start to take a leadership role, and you'll also be able to contribute more to society around you. And I think, as individuals, as Hindus, this comes to us naturally. And when I look around me, I have so many role models doing this that I have no choice but to follow in their footsteps.
sure. Okay, so your career as an ophthalmologist, giving back through those means has obviously been a contribution that you've made yourself personally to society. What other ways in which, so the YFS was obviously a large project that you encompassed that sort of builds about that seva bhav within you. What other ways are there that someone can contribute to society?
Whether it's individually giving time to volunteer or through a project such as YFS, where you nurture younger individuals and show them opportunities in which they can give back, is is a great way to contribute to society. But Sumiji, what I've found is that actually your impact is quite limited. So my
Okay.
impact is limited in the time I can directly give or the people I can directly inspire.
Okay, let's break that down a little bit. Why is time a restriction? Like I can only give so much time to
Absolutely, I can
noble
only.
causes.
So let's take you for example. So
Okay.
you are a full-time worker, as in
Yep.
you have a job,
Yep.
have a very good job, and that keeps you busy, and you are volunteering to do this VM podcast. And
Sure.
and how many hours a day or how many hours a week do you think that you'd actually give to this podcast?
difficult to quantify, but yeah, I spend a lot of time, if it's not researching, then editing or trying to explore a topic further so that I can actually bring it onto the podcast. It's very difficult to talk about things you don't know about in a lot of detail. So, and that's that's part of my contribution to society, is a lot of time I spend with Vichar Manthan, and I'm very proud of that. It's an independent organization. We're looking to explore modern day issues and to see actually how we can bring a nuanced, earnest exploration of such ideas. You only need to go onto the website, vicharmanthan.org, and look at some of the events, some of the papers. I've just started Oxford Book Club. We're learning about author Jiddu Krishnamurti, who I think is a phenomenal speaker. And then, of course, the VM podcast, which everyone is listening to right now. So that's part of my time I give up for that, but that's very limited. It's hard to balance that, of course, but it's a challenge I'm pushing forward with. To give you some example, there are enterprise companies out there that will give their employees time back to volunteer. For some people it's 2 hours, for some people it's 2 weeks. And that's because it's recognized at a sort of enterprise level that as humans, we need to contribute to society. Tony Robbins talks about the six human needs, right? 4 of them are human and 2 of them are spiritual. And without going into too much detail, but the first four human needs are certainty, uncertainty, significance, and connection. And then the spiritual needs are growth and contribution. So as a human, to spiritually evolve, we must have growth and contribution. And those are you can sort of overlap a lot of what happens in growth and contribution. And so even for me, doing the VM podcast, I'm going to learn hopefully so much from so many different people, interviewing them, and to then help others understand what they are. It's a blessing for me, totally.
Sumit, I think you put that beautifully. Contribution and giving back is such a key part of our growth as individuals and as a society. So the question is, how can we give sustainably? You only have X amount of time that you can give to Vichar Manthan and Vichar Manthan podcasts. And there's
True.
only a certain amount of time that volunteers can give. But what does that look like on the long term? What impact will you have on the long term? And that's something I'd like to explore through this podcast today, is what does sustainable contribution look like, and how important it is to contribute, and how we can do that so we leave a legacy, so long after we're gone we've left a mark.
Yeah, yeah, that makes so much sense. Time is one way that one can contribute. What is another one we're talking about?
Another way to contribute would be through the giving of wealth, and this can be done on a long-term sustainable level. I think, Sumit, a good way to think about this is, let's look at what success means. Okay, so if I can ask, what does success mean to you on an individual level?
Wow, punchy question. Success to me is the harmonious travel through your hurdles. No, let me rephrase that. The harmonious travel through life whilst sustaining that. And let me break that down. So, what I mean by the travel through life is, if you look at all parts of your life, relationships, wealth, family life, career, who you are as a person, identity, just the sum total of what your life is, each of these factions, there are opportunities to grow and elevate yourself. And some of these situations will bring about a diminishing within you. There's a push and pull. There's a pro and a con. There's a good and a bad. Like, life is not just simple. There's challenges to overcome. And so traveling through life is, straddling that path, going through what makes you who you are. And so long as you're in a net positive state, so long as you're progressing along that journey and balancing along the way, but in a harmonious way, with a smile on your face, that's success. It's recognizing that there are going to be challenges, but I'm still going to move forward and progress through them, come what may, I think is what success means.
So success is net positive. There's a
Yeah.
positive, there's a directional growth through which there's a sense of improvement and development and achievement, and you're sort of summarizing that to say net positive on an
Yeah, like a
individual level.
drive, right? Even if you go one step back, you're going to go two steps forward. It's that's such a basic example of what I'm saying, but like think about relationships, wealth, everything that sums up what your life is, right? It's my dharma.
Yes, in the Bhagavad Gita, there's a famous slok that I'm sure many of our listeners will know. It's chapter 2, verse 47, and Krishna says to Arjun, "We must act. We must do our duty, and to do our duty is our dharma. But let's not be attached to the fruits, to the outcomes of this action." And he also says that there is no inaction. We can't possibly not act. Everything we're doing, there's an action. There's a doing. You're sitting here listening to me. You might be making notes. At our basic resting state, we're still breathing. There's still blood pumping through our body. So everything we do is action. So let's be conscious of the direction in which we act.
Hmm.
And let's commit to that direction fully. And after you've committed to that, then don't worry if you stumble or you struggle or things aren't quite as you had anticipated. Because even through that, there's an opportunity to learn, to grow, to build your resilience.
That's
And
beautiful.
and that yeah, and that's the beauty of what you're trying to say, the net positive. So ultimately, let's try and be the best version of us. Let's
Hmm.
commit to a cause, to a direction. And through that journey, what may, let's use that as an opportunity to learn. So it's very much about the mindset that we have in our approach to life.
Yeah, and that is really amazing. Getting these bites of wisdom, I think, from the Gita. To not be attached to the fruits of your labor.
Which is often interpreted as it's okay to fail. And here what I would say is that it's okay to fail providing you learn from that you get up and you try again. And there's a
Yeah,
process of self-reflection where you work out what you could do better next time, and you get up and maybe fail again, but that's okay. Your development as a person, where your resilient is built, where true grit comes from, is the getting up and
yeah.
going at it again.
So that line there about it's okay to fail. That's quite a sort of I want to say new age, millennial, sort of woke type expression. At least you kind of hear it. It's okay to fail. And yes, it is. So long, and what you're saying is, so long as there is an analysis afterwards, an understanding, a learning, a feedback loop in which you look at that failure and learn from it, grow from it, capitalize from that. That's what you're saying, right?
Where you take responsibility for the direction of your growth. You own it. You own those failures.
Make it actually a conscious effort, not to just float through life and say, "Yeah, I'm a good person. I'm a good person," and you may well be great. Hats off to you, but that's not enough. That's not even the duty. The duty is to make a conscious effort of growth. You said you had another question.
I do. We've explored in quite a lot of detail what individual success means. Now, if I ask you, what does a successful society look like? What does it mean to flourish as a society? What would you say?
Yeah, good question. A successful society is where, if you look at the five cornerstones of society, and that's religion, wealth, culture and literature, and rights and duties. And this was all covered off in Vijay Sustainable Narratives Conference 2020. If you look at those five cornerstones of society and see that society is benefiting from how those systems are at play, then that is what success looks like. And let me break that down just a little bit. If you look at wealth in society, is it balanced? Is it fair? Do people have equal opportunities for success to grow in a society of wealth? Or are people in debt? Is there a financial crisis? Are things going wrong with wealth? You can quite quickly assess what society is doing with wealth, for example. Let's look at religion. And there are many religions, and there are several schools of thought around if they are all teaching the same thing and if they all believe in one god. Like that, I think that's an elementary way of looking at things. Once you understand the nuances around, say, Abrahamic faith or Dharmic based faith, they are very different. They're very different in their view of the world and how one should act. So I don't think it's fair to say all religions are the same. That's just pacifying a far left liberal way of looking at things. It's far more nuanced than that. So let's look at religion, though, and the sum total of what they are. Are they helping society flourish? Is one religion helping society flourish in one way that another one isn't? And we should be bold enough to critique such schools of thought, such views of the world. So, religion, are they helping society flourish? And we can go into the details of the rest of them, but that's what I would use as a barometer of if society, if humanity, if as a human race, we are successful.
One would say that a flourishing society is a society where the community is coming together, regardless of your faith or your religious belief or your wealth. But there's a coming together of people for a cause that's greater than themselves.
Yeah.
So the idea that you're working towards something greater than yourself is actually a necessary precursor for success. A society where we work together to solve the problems facing humanity, such as homelessness, such as access to universal healthcare, just the opportunity for education, simple
Yeah.
things like food. If we're flourishing as a society, are we empowering, are we enabling those who are the most vulnerable members of our society?
Yeah. We are saying that a flourishing society is helping those most in need, like the bottom levels, layers of society that are not doing well from whatever angle we look at that. And so a society that is trying to bring the base level higher is a flourishing society. And that's great that we look at those bottom layers. I think it's also fair and perhaps important to also look at the top levels of society from a sort of contribution perspective. Would it be fair to call out, celebrate, and maybe empower more those parts of society that contribute the most? So I don't know. Is there a part of society that contributes the most? Is there a way that we can work that out? Does that exist?
Let's go to an external authority on this. There's the Office for National Statistics that bring out a report following the UK census. And I think the last one was done
When
a couple of years ago.
we're supposed to have one 2020, right? It's been delayed.
Absolutely. I think we're due to have one, but delayed because of COVID. If we look at their last report, it looks at how one of the parameters it looks at is how successful ethnic minority groups are. And it looks at education, it looks at wealth.
In the UK.
In the UK, absolutely. So let's look at British Hindus. So 50 to 60% of British Hindus are likely to have secondary education, likely to have a higher degree. And this is on par with the Jewish community. But it's twice as many as other ethnic minority groups in the UK. So
Okay.
it would be fair to say that Hindus are doing extremely well when it comes to education. And if you look around you, that probably reflects what you see.
Yeah. So that's education. What else?
Wealth, that's the other marker of individual success. And over 40% of Indian households have an income of more than £1,000 a week. So
That's
that's over
50.
£50,000 a year. Yeah. which is a lot. That's, it might not, for some of our listeners, it might not sound like a lot, but it's double the average household income in the UK.
Yeah, yeah.
And again, this is on par with the Jewish community.
Okay, so you're saying the British Hindu population in the UK are doing well, very well, that in education and in wealth, in income. But it's great to have deep pockets so long as what we're saying here is that some of that is going back to society, contributing, charitable donations. Are we able to look at some of those statistics as well? Does that report generate the same thing? How much are these communities contributing back to society from a wealth perspective? That's something we can measure easily.
As Hindus, I think Seva has always been a big part of our narrative,
Yeah.
and we would think that actually our contribution to society is probably large. But when we look at the numbers, I'm not sure that they reflect this. So in that same report, they looked at the percentage of the community which said that they volunteered time in a year. So how many people how many people gave any sort of time to volunteer, whatever the cause may be? And they found that 12% of Hindus surveyed say they give any sort of time within 12 months to seva or to volunteering. When you look at other religious groups, a much higher proportion are giving time to volunteering. Up to 50% of the Jewish population volunteer some time. And that might be, through volunteering at the homeless center or at the synagogue or through teaching maths and English. But the point here is, despite seva being a core value, is that translating into action in
Mm.
our contribution of time? And even if we look at how much money Hindu households give to societal causes or charity, there was an Asian Voice article a few years ago which had some really interesting facts. So it outlined that Hindus actually, compared to other religious groups, have the lowest amount of charitable giving in this country.
Okay.
And although we do give to things like specific campaigns, like, do you remember the £5 campaign where the new £5 notes had tallow in them?
Yeah, there's not a vegan money system that we have anymore.
Absolutely.
No.
So, that raised a lot of eyebrows, and we actively gave to that cause. Or if you remember, Shambu the bull was going to be put down. And
Yeah, oh my God, that was some time ago.
so we do give, but it's in a very reactive way, not proactive sense.
I remember when I first started earning money, my mum said, you've got to give your first paycheck to the mandar or to a senior member of your household. And that was quite a nice thing to do. We should contribute back. There are systems at play that we can do this. So how can one, I think I'm trying to answer the question, how can one contribute?
As British Hindus, we're incredibly successful on an individual level. But when it comes to giving back to our community, I think there's definitely scope to give more. And one of the reasons I think there's a discrepancy between these religious groups is that some other religious doctrines mandate that you give X amount. So, for example, you know, Christians are encouraged to give between 2.5 to 10% of their income to the church. And many young people in our generation do this. You just have to
Mm,
ask around, ask at work, and you'll be surprised. Even in the Islamic traditions, there's a doctrine that makes you give back. Whereas, although dan is something that we talk about, how much do we give is actually very little. So I would say let's start talking. Let's start talking about the people, the organizations that are doing good work. And if these are aligned with your beliefs, then let's support that work. Let's fund them. Let's give money. And let this be a significant contribution. And you can ask what a significant contribution is. And I would say that all of us, each individual, should be looking at giving at least 1%. Let's call it the 1% club. Okay. It's a cool thing. I'm going to be part of it. You can be part of it. Let's all start to think 1% is very little. Let's start to
yeah,
give 1% to the
it doesn't
ideas
sound
that we think matter, to the organizations that we believe are doing good work. Let's
okay.
put our money where our mouth is.
Yeah, 1% definitely is not a lot. We should all. I want to join this club. We'll have to find out more. And I'm going to ask you where that 1% should go, and also why our idea is important. But before we get into that, we're going to go into the rapid fire round. I hope you are ready. Every time I ask this, people look at me like, "Oh my god." Bansri G, what is the best advice anybody has ever given you?
I think our lives are filled with advice from elders and parents and communities. But one of the most powerful things that someone very recently said to me as I'm considering what to do, in my journey going forward, is they said to be fully alive, fully human, and completely awake is to be continually thrown out of the nest. And I love this. There's a sense of don't get comfortable, because if you're comfortable, there's a sort of mediocrity that comes with that. But
Hmm,
actually, always be ready to push yourself outside of your comfort zone to do something that you're not quite ready for, that you haven't prepared for, something that you think you're going to fail at, because it's at the edge of your comfort zone when you're thrown implies purposefully thrown outside of your nest. That's where your growth lies. And I really like that, especially for people in our age group who are perhaps reaching a stage in our lives where we're very comfortable, where we've achieved things that we wanted to achieve. But what next? Let's be driven to go that one step further. So I really like that.
amazing. That is very, very great advice. One that I think we can all benefit from listening to. Great to hear. I think we've spoken about this a little bit when you were talking about your time in rural India, but has there been a moment in your life where your paradigm shifted?
I think that life is full of paradigm shifts, and life is a journey of learning. And there's always an interaction that you might have with someone that changes what you think or how you act. And there are big ones and there are small ones. But as you mentioned, one of the big ones for me was my time in India. And I would encourage anybody who has the opportunity to take out that time and spend time on the ground with organizations doing Sewa work to do that. One of the things I remember doing when I came back was trying to live on £1 a day. The £1 a day is 100 rupees, okay? And that's a lot of money. And it's what maybe 10% of the Indian population lives on daily.
Wow.
So obviously there was cheating. I got my parents to cook me food and
Mm.
stole toiletries from my mum. But essentially it meant that I was a little bit more organized in the way I approached my day. And I didn't rely so much on just buying a bottle of water or buying lunch.
Pansriji, what does sustainability mean to you?
Sustainability is,
This is the rapid fire round for anyone coming on the VM podcast. She's looking at me like, ah.
okay, sustainability is the idea of living in harmony with the world around you. So, causing minimal harm, acting in a way that you can flourish and enables the world around you to flourish. Um, and this idea is sort of over a long period of time. So, not just what can I do for my well being now, but what can I do for humanity's well being in the long term? This is what sustainability means to me.
Very nice. What goes into your perfect breakfast smoothie?
Sumitji, I have to admit, I don't have the perfect breakfast smoothie, but I have the perfect breakfast chai.
Okay. Okay, sure. What goes in that then?
There's oat milk, water, cinnamon, cardamom, sugar, ginger, and of course, chai leaves.
Okay. Okay. Very nice. If you were stranded on an island, what three items would you take with you and why?
I'd definitely take some snorkeling gear.
Okay.
Um, uh, Probably take a knife of some sort to make the most of those coconuts, and maybe a book to read.
Okay, that goes into the next question. What's your favorite book?
So, anybody who has asked me this question before knows that it's a book called My Grandfather's Blessings.
Okay.
And this is a book that I recommend for all the YFS interns to read. And however hard it is to get them to actually read it, when they read it, they all, love it. And I think for everybody listening, it's a book about resilience and service and contribution, written by a doctor, and I highly recommend it. It's called My Grandfather's Blessings.
Okay, we'll share a link in the description below, as we always do. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
I think it would be knowing what the other is thinking.
Wow.
Have you ever seen that
Why?
film Inside Out?
Yes.
I think that human beings are so complex. We're never quite transparent in our emotions and our feelings. And often it comes down into the ways in which we can communicate it. And often we don't do a good job of this. And I think that leads to misunderstandings and conflict. So perhaps having the ability to know what the other is thinking and would lead to a more harmonious way of living.
Deep. Okay. Here today on the VM podcast, I would like you to make a commitment, something that makes you more sustainable, perhaps more dharmic. Is there something that you've been putting off? Is there a habit that you know you want to do? What's that one change you can make that you can commit to here, and we will hold you accountable to?
I think this is the perfect opportunity, and now it's public, I'm going to have to do it, is to say that I'm going to contribute 1% of my income for the
Wow,
rest of my working life to a cause that I care about, to a cause that promotes dharmic values in a sustainable way.
beautiful, beautiful. The 1% Club. You heard it here first on the VM podcast. If you could say something to your younger self, what would it be?
Life is beautiful. It's a privilege to have the chance to experience. So live it, enjoy it. Don't take yourself too seriously. Go out there, experience, fall, get up, try again, and keep learning.
Wow, epic. Love it. Love to hear it. Thank you so much. Okay, that's, I think, the end of the rapid fire questions. Let's get back into our discussion. So I want to go straight into something. You just made a commitment about the 1% Club, and I hope many, many more people will join this concept. Where to?
Absolutely. Where do you give your 1% to? And I think
Yeah.
this is a pertinent question. And I think this goes back to when we explored what does contributing sustainably look like. From my journey and my experiences, I think I've come to the realization that if you want to make sustainable change in society, then you have to fund ideas.
Okay. So you're saying ideas are important, and that's where the money should go. So why are ideas important?
Ideas are important because ideas inspire thoughts, and it's these thoughts that drive action. So ideas are the precursor or the prerequisite to any action. And this applies both on an individual and a societal level. So if you look at simple things like me making my morning chai, well, firstly, I have the thought or the idea that I'm going to make the chai, and then I get up and put it together. And even on a bigger level, if we look at man's travel to the moon, well, this stemmed from the idea, the dream of wanting
Mm,
to land on the moon. And then you got the research and the action and the doing. And if we take a broader idea, the idea of living sustainably, so on an individual level, this would manifest as lifestyle choices such as being vegan or consuming ethical fashion. On a societal level, we've seen the idea of living sustainably manifest in different ways, from research into eco housing to alternative energy sources. And these are all ideas driving a change in society.
yeah. I think maybe something like the COVID has been a catalyst for some of that change. We've actually now having to rethink a lot of how we live, at both an individual level and a society level. So the thing you said there about sort of eco housing and community, I know when we were discussing this before.
COVID has been the catalyst for rethinking the way we live as a community. So there's a re-emergence of sense of community. We've
Right.
gone from living in big towns and big cities to bringing together this sort of community life where we are self-reliant in the way that we live, in our produce, in our education, and that reduces long distance travel by cars or public transport. And this re-emergence of community is being seen all over Europe, and it's beautiful.
It's almost like we're having to rediscover what our values are. We've become so embedded and comfortable in this capitalist sort of society. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but we've become comfortable with the way things have been the way they've been for some time, right? And as a result of this pandemic, we have really had to rethink the way we are.
And in any flourishing society, there should always be this constant critique and challenge and renewal of ideas that are at the core of our society. Because it's these ideas that fundamentally drive the direction of our society. So
Mm.
absolutely, let's use every opportunity we get to critique them and challenge them and see what works for us and doesn't work for us. So let me give you another example, Sumitji, on the vegan front. The idea that our current consumption of meat and dairy is not sustainable is really what's driving this shift towards veganism. And
Okay.
so if we look at how much the vegan market has grown, it's grown by something like 1000% in the last 5 years. That's 200% a year. And so
Wow.
that stemmed from a simple idea that it's no longer sustainable for the climate, for the future of this earth, to consume as much meat and dairy as we do. So let's do something about it. And then building on that idea, you then have money that funds the research into climate change and sustainable ways of living.
What's needed for an idea to flourish?
Yeah, if we stick with this idea of veganism, then you've got the idea that came out of research that was funded. So you need money. You need money to fund the research, and then you need institutions. So be it governments or supermarkets, and then you need people. So you need people like you and I, that are going to go out there and vote with the way that we buy. So we're instead of buying dairy milk, we might now purchase oat milk. And lastly, but this is really important, is you need time. That nothing happens overnight. Ideas take time to permeate in a society, and it's ideas can only stand the test of time if they have people, money, and institutions behind them.
Okay. So we've understood what's needed for an idea to flourish: people, time, money, and institutions. And we'll go into more detail with that later. But how? How do those things then help an idea to flourish? How does that permeate through society? Do you have an example, maybe?
So, Mitchie, I think that's a great question. So, how do ideas influence society? If you imagine that you have a ball and you're rolling it down from incline from A to B, and you want to change the direction of that ball, you want to change the track, there's a few things you can do. So, you can either apply a small force for a long period of time to nudge it onto a different track,
Yeah.
or you can apply a slightly higher force for a shorter period of time. And that will do the same thing. It will nudge the ball onto a different track. And finally, you can apply an explosive force for an instant
Yeah.
to nudge the ball completely off track.
Hmm.
So if we use this analogy and think that ideas are the change in direction that's happening to that ball, and institutions are the things that are the driving force, that's the push that happens.
Okay.
So the diffusion of an idea through society can happen in many ways. It can be through things like policy or marketing campaigns or legislation. And let me give you an example of this. So the Roman Catholic Church, okay, is the world's largest institution. And so this is a big force, a massive force that's acted on humanity for a long period of time. And it's played a significant role in the development of the Western civilization, be it through influence on art or culture or the establishing of Europe's earliest universities. It's actually now the largest non-government provider of health and education in the world. Okay.
Wow.
So this is an example of how Christian ideas, have the backing of the church as an institution. They have money and they have people. I think the membership of the Roman Catholic Church is something like 1.3 billion at the moment. These ideas have, underwritten the fabric of our society. Let me give you another example. So when many years ago, about 1970s, there was a lot of research done in health institutes about the impact, the relation between smoking and lung cancer. So it was established that 80 to 90% of lung cancer was associated with smoking. So this was the idea. The idea was that smoking damages health. Okay.
Yeah.
And then institutions like governments started to make policy to try and reduce smoking, to improve the nation's health. And they did this through different things. So first they started putting those sort of health warnings on cigarette packets that weren't there before. And then they tried to, I think it was the Labour government that increased taxation on cigarettes. Again, no real big impact. But then in 2007, the Conservative government banned smoking indoors.
Yeah.
And this was a game changer. And if we look at why this worked because now if I want to smoke, I have to go outdoors, which means I'm probably going to miss out on the conversation happening in the staff room.
There's a lot more restriction
It's
to.
restrictive, absolutely. We don't like being outside of the tribe. So I don't want to go outside and be different. So this is another great example of how ideas that are important to the flourishing of a society, such as reduction in smoking, when backed by institutions and policy and money over a period of time, really change our human behaviors.
And I think our history is littered with examples of this, where policy and research have had an impact on the way in which society moves.
Ideas clearly influence society, and they're the foundation of sustainable change. So, if we want to influence the direction of change, then it's these ideas that we need to start funding.
Yeah, so ideas are definitely important. It's the very nature of what it means to be human has come from ideas, which have then moved into thought and then action, and that's affected us individually and at a society level. Even something as simple as examples that you gave with smoking, and we can look at that from all types of things. You look at anything big going on in the world, you can trace that back to an idea that someone had, and how that's been influenced with the help of things like people, time, money, and institutions. And if someone wanted to drive a more dharmic narrative, a society that uplifts one another, that is beneficial to all, one that nullifies harm and conflict and progresses in a loving and compassionate manner, really take us to a more wholesome state of mind, a sense of punyam. Are there any institutions out there that could do that, that could be that catalyst?
I think that your question is pertinent. So, firstly, this requires an understanding that dharmic experience and knowledge has a contribution to make to the challenges that society faces, be it climate change or sustainable health systems or justice systems or education. And if we believe this, if we believe that our dharmic values have something to contribute, then how do we fund them? And what organizations are doing this work? This is where the Earth Foundation and the Center for Sustainability come in. So the Earth Foundation aims to fund ideas that matter and the ideas that are conducive to the flourishing of humanity going forward. So we recognize that ideas need money, and what we want to do is support experts who are earnestly exploring these ideas that are rooted in dharmic Hindu civilizational knowledge and experience. And this might be through academic research, or it might be through prestigious institutes or organizations who are looking at tackling some of the hardest challenges facing humanity. So you and I might not be able to dedicate our time to the problem of homelessness and tackling this from a dharmic lens, but we are able to contribute through funding the research and funding the ideas that will help drive the solutions.
Okay.
And it's through these partnerships with academics and institutions that the Earth Foundation aims to develop our capacity and our capability to understand dharmic values and their contribution to sustainability.
Okay. And so you're going to be spending some time volunteering for the Earth Foundation. How does one be a supporter of the Earth Foundation?
We've explored different ways in which you can contribute, be it time or wealth. And I think as a society, we really have to start contributing more. We have to start giving back more. And we have to back with our time and with our wealth ideas and institutions that are doing good work. So I'd say a great place to start, and you can join me on this as I've pledged to do this, is by giving 1% of your income to a cause that you believe in. So if you give that to the Earth Foundation, that means that we're investing in ideas, in research, in institutions that explore dharmic values and how we can use these for the flourishing of human society. So, Sumitji, I would say giving 1% is a great place to start, and giving 1% to the Earth Foundation is a great way to contribute and make a difference. And more importantly, to leave a legacy, to leave an impact that far beyond your lifetime, you've made a difference to research, to ideas, to institution, to the direction, to the very fabric of society. And there's very few things that you can do to make this kind of impact. And I think giving 1% to the Earth Foundation is a great way to start.
Let's take an example like homelessness. That's a problem that cannot be solved overnight. You couldn't just round up, even if you had lots and lots of money, you could go out and try to find let's just take the UK, for example. You could try and find all the homeless people and then put them in shelter for the night. And that you would have done it for one night. But what happens the second night? What happens in a week, a month, a year, 10 years, 100 years from now? You can't solve that problem overnight. So something like a foundation that's going to look into the research and change society at a policy level, at a deeper level, is where that real change can come from. Is there any advice you can give someone that may ask why they should contribute?
Imagine that you started contributing to the Hindu Samaj through the Earth Foundation. Let's talk about what impact that would have in real life.
Sometimes it's a lofty vision to ask people for money, for time, for these kind of things. So I think, and if you look at it from a sort of wealth management perspective, one might ask, what are you going to do with this money? So let's say the Earth Foundation has realized a sizable amount of contribution through the 1% Club, which we are all going to join, of course. What happens to that money? Where does that go?
By supporting and funding academic research, be it students who want to pursue PhDs in Sanskrit, in literature, or by supporting by supporting organizations such as the work that Vichar Manthan does, or institutions such as the Center for Sustainability. These are people who are ready to work and earnestly explore these ideas, but they just need our support. They need our money. They need resources. So once we provide this, we'll definitely start to see paradigm shifts in our dharmic contributions to society as a large. So, for example, Sumitji, you mentioned the Sustainable Narratives Conference. Now, that was a phenomenal piece of work put together, in something like just over 7 weeks.
7 weeks, yeah. And that's done by working professionals. These are people that have jobs and families and children. And for 7 weeks, we plowed, I don't know how many man hours into making that a success.
And by success, you mean you had over 22,000 views.
Yeah.
And imagine now, so the level of professionalism that conference delivered was phenomenal. It was on par with funded think tanks. If you have a look at some other think tanks, like Chatham House, the Carnegie Endowment, well, I think what you put together as a VM team was easily on par with that. Now, imagine if you had funding, funding for the tech, for the marketing, for the exploration of ideas, for the research. Imagine what your impact will be then.
Yeah, it's important to invest in ideas that shape our world. It's that earnest, that nuanced research and discussion from a sustainable point of view that is key to addressing the questions that we face today. And it's only with such contributions is important work like that possible.
Ideas are everything. They influence our society. They're the foundations for long term sustainable change. If we want a seat at the table as Hindus, we really have to start influencing that direction of change by funding the ideas.
That's amazing. And I think we've really discussed today what sustainable contributions look like. Bansri, we are very privileged to have had you on the VM podcast. I've certainly learned a lot. Is there one thing that you would like the listeners to take away?
We are incredibly privileged to have all the opportunities that we do, be it education, health, social mobility, here in the UK. And as Hindus, we're doing incredibly well on an individual level. So, my question that I'd like to leave you with is, what impact are you going to have beyond your own lifetime? What contribution are you going to make to society? And how are you going to do this?
Excellent, excellent questions there by Bansri. Thank you very much for gracing us with such knowledge. What contributions are we making to society? Are they sustainable? And how can we help such ideas permeate through daily life? This was a VM podcast. I hope you have learned something here today. I certainly have. If there is anything that you thought was pertinent, if there are any ideas that you'd like to discuss further, please do email in. I'm very interested to hear what you have to say. Podcast@vicharmanthan.org. And I encourage you to have a look at the website for all the other things that Vichar Manthan is doing with papers, with events, and with book clubs, and through ideas that matter. We've discussed what sustainable contributions are. And I think the question that's been asked today is, what contribution are you going to make? And are you going to join the 1% Club? I'm sure I can drop some more information in the description below. My name is Sumit Sharma, and as ever, it has been my great privilege to host the VM podcast, a project looking to explore modern day issues through a dharmic lens. Please tune in, please subscribe, and please let us know what you think. Namaste.